The challenge hit Dry Creek Valley like a lightning strike nobody saw coming. One moment the town was quiet. The next, every ranch hand, drifter, and saddle-worn cowboy was talking about one woman's voice rising above the dust outside the general store. Catherine Sterling stood there with her chin high, her eyes sharp as broken glass, and her words carried across the street like a drum calling men to battle. She wasn't looking for trouble. She was looking for the truth. "If you're a real cowboy," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "prove it on my stallion." That single line spread through the valley faster than a prairie fire. Catherine owned Tempest, a massive black stallion taller than most men's hopes and twice as wild. He had the power of a thunderstorm and the temper of one, too. 25 men had tried him. 25 men had failed. Some lasted 8 seconds, some 15, none longer. Every one of them limped home, sore, dusty, and embarrassed. But Catherine wasn't offering a simple dare. She was offering $50 gold, enough money to start a ranch, enough money to change a man's life, enough money to make fools out of brave men. Her late husband had been the only person Tempest ever allowed on his back. Catherine had watched them from the porch, horse and rider moving like one creature stitched from the same spirit. That was 3 years ago, just before sickness took him. Since then, no one had matched him. Catherine believed there was still one man out there who could. The town doctor didn't share her hope. After the 10th bruised rider he'd seen that week, he muttered that her challenge was going to fill his office before winter came. But Catherine kept her ground. She knew what she'd seen the day her husband rode Tempest. She knew the right man could do it again. Miles away, a cowboy named Jake Morrison sat in a lonely line shack, warming his hands beside a tired fire. Jake lived quieter than most men. He fixed fences for the Double Bar Ranch, checked cattle in the far pastures, and kept to himself. Life had carved deep lines into his face, not from age, but from the war and all the ghosts it left behind. He wasn't scared of much, but he also didn't go looking for trouble. Tempest, however, wasn't trouble. Something about the stories Jake heard drifting down the cattle trails pulled at him. Not the money, not the fame. Something deeper, something honest. Horses didn't lie. Horses didn't play games. A horse told you exactly who you were, and if you listened, sometimes that truth could save a man's soul. Jake finished his coffee, stared into the dying fire, and felt a shift inside his chest. A quiet answer to a question he hadn't asked out loud. By morning he had his bay gelding, copper saddled and ready. He packed light, a bedroll, some hardtack, and a steady heart that had learned to want something again, though he didn't yet know what. The ride into Dry Creek Valley took half a day. The land rolled from open grass to rocky mesa, then dipped down into cottonwood-lined creeks. Jake felt the air change before he heard the sound. Tempest scream carrying across the valley like the shout of a wild king defending his throne. The Sterling Ranch sat in a wide bowl of land, green and peaceful except for the storm inside the corral. Jake slid off Copper and walked toward the crowd gathered along the fence. Tempest was a sight no story could do justice. Black as midnight, tall as a church door, and burned through with a fire that refused to bow to any man. The challenger inside the corral didn't stand a chance. Jake saw it before the man even threw his loop. The rope landed. The stallion reared. The man flew. Dust swallowed the scene, and the crowd groaned when the fellow hit the fence hard enough to rattle teeth. Jake stepped closer, not for the show, but because he couldn't look away. Tempest wasn't cruel. He was proud. He was pure. He was waiting. That was when Jake saw her. Catherine Sterling stood on the porch with the posture of a woman who'd held up a ranch alone for too many years. She wasn't delicate. She was solid, strong, and carried a kind of quiet sadness that made a man want to stand straighter in her presence. Her eyes were gray as winter sky, and when they met Jake's, he felt something shift inside him again, stronger this time. "You here to try your luck?" she called. Jake tipped his hat. "Thinking about it, ma'am?" The crowd hushed, sensing something different in the air. Catherine studied him, not his gear. She looked straight through him, searching for the truth. "What makes you different from the others?" she asked. Jake could have bragged. He could have lied. Instead, he said, "Can't say that I am different. I'm not here to prove anything. Not to you. Not to the crowd. I just want to see if that horse and I can agree on something." Her expression softened. "Not much. Just enough. I'm Catherine Sterling," she said, stepping off the porch. "Jake Morrison." She nodded once. A serious nod. A nod that meant she'd decided something important. "Then go on," she said. "Meet him." Jake walked to the fence. Tempest watched him with dark eyes full of fire and judgment. Jake didn't climb in. He just stood there, quiet, patient, present. Tempest stepped forward. The valley held its breath. And for the first time in 3 long years, the stallion didn't turn away. Jake climbed the fence only after Tempest gave him permission in the way horses do, not with words, but with the soft lowering of the head and a slight step forward. The crowd leaned in, holding their breath like churchgoers waiting for a miracle. Jake could feel Catherine's eyes on him from the fence, sharp but hopeful, as if she was afraid to hope too much. Inside the corral, the air felt different, thicker, still. Like the moment right before rain, when the whole world waits. Tempest circled him slowly, each step careful and measured, testing him the same way a wild river tests a bridge. Jake stayed loose, shoulders relaxed, hands open, letting the horse read him. "You've had your fill of fools, haven't you?" Jake said in a low voice meant only for the stallion. Tempest flicked an ear forward. His muscles twitched once along his shoulder, like he remembered the rope burns and rough hands of the men who came before. Jake didn't move closer. He didn't reach out. He let the horse come to him. Minutes passed, long and slow. The crowd shifted nervously. Someone whispered that the horse was just toying with him. Someone else said Jake looked scared. But Catherine watched with a different kind of understanding. She saw what the others couldn't. This wasn't fear. This was respect. Then Tempest made his choice. He stepped in. Not fast, not sudden, just steady, deliberate steps until he was close enough that Jake could feel the warm breath against his shirt. Jake lifted his hand slowly and rested it on the stallion's neck. Tempest didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned into the touch like a man who had been alone too long. A murmur went through the crowd. Jake took his time. 10 minutes of soft talk and gentle touches. 10 minutes of letting Tempest learn the rhythm of his breathing. 10 minutes of showing the stallion that no tricks were coming. No whip, no rope, no pain. When Jake finally moved to mount, he did it the way you approach a friend, not a challenge. He slid his foot into the stirrup he'd fashioned from braided leather, paused, and swung up slow and easy. Tempest stiffened for half a heartbeat, then settled like the earth under a man's boots. Someone gasped. Someone else swore softly. Jake sat tall in the saddle. The horse shifted, testing him, feeling him. "I'm right here," Jake whispered. "We do this together."
Tempest stepped forward.
One step, then another, and the valley went silent. The stallion moved with a smoothness that surprised even Jake. He wasn't fighting, he wasn't bucking. He was listening, learning, trusting. Jake loosened the reins, breathing slow, letting the horse decide the pace. Catherine gripped the fence, knuckles white. She'd seen this once before, years ago, when her husband had ridden Tempest like they shared the same heartbeat. Now she watched another man do the same thing, and her heart clenched with a mix of fear and something she couldn't yet name. Tempest lifted into a trot, a slow, floating gait like wind drifting over tall grass. Jake moved with him, balanced and calm. The stallion's ears stayed forward, pointed at the horizon like he had finally found the road he'd been waiting for. "Time?" Jake called, without looking away from the space ahead. 8 minutes, someone shouted. 2 more, but it didn't feel like a challenge. It felt like prayer. Then Tempest made the next choice. Without warning, he pushed into a canter, not wild or angry, but full of power, a power that trusted the man on his back. Dust rose behind them like a trail of smoke as they circled the corral. Jake felt everything shift inside him, the loneliness, the quiet ache, The years of running from himself, all of it fell away with every stride. He wasn't riding a wild stallion. He was riding hope. When Catherine finally found her voice, it shook. 10 minutes. But Tempest didn't stop. Not yet. He slowed only when Jake eased back, and together they came to a gentle halt in the center of the corral. Jake ran a hand down Tempest's neck, his voice soft. "You did good, partner." When he dismounted, his legs trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what had just happened. Tempest nudged his shoulder, a soft, warm push that felt like acceptance. Catherine stepped into the corral, her boots sinking into the dust. "You rode him," she whispered. "You really rode him." 15 minutes, someone said from the fence. He stayed on for 15, but Catherine didn't look at them. She looked at Jake, at the way Tempest stood close to him, at the quiet understanding between man and horse. She reached into her pocket and held out the gold coins. $50. You earned it. Jake didn't take them. "I didn't come for the money." "Then what did you come for?" she asked. Jake looked at Tempest, then back at her. His voice was steady. "To find something I lost a long time ago." For a moment neither of them spoke. Wind moved the dust. A hawk cried overhead. Tempest breathed slow and calm beside him. Catherine's voice softened. "What did you lose, Jake?" He met her eyes, honest, open. "Myself, I guess." Her expression changed, just enough to show the smallest spark of something warm. "Maybe you found more than that today," she said. Jake didn't know it yet. Catherine didn't know it yet. Tempest maybe knew before both of them, but this moment, this ride, was only the beginning. Spring came early to Dry Creek Valley that year, softening the earth, warming the wind, and carrying the scent of new grass across the hills. It had been months since the day Jake Morrison rode Tempest, months since Catherine Sterling offered him a job and a place to stay, months since something unspoken began blooming between them like wildflowers after rain. Life on the Sterling Ranch settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Jake worked fences, tended cattle, repaired roofs, and checked the far pastures with Tempest moving under him, like a shadow that had learned to trust the sun. Catherine managed the ranch books, handled supply trips to town, and made decisions with the quiet strength of someone who had carried the weight alone too long and was finally learning to share it. Their morning started with the clatter of coffee mugs on the porch table and ended with conversations that drifted from weather to memories, to small secrets that only came out when the sky turned dark. Jake found himself laughing more. Catherine found herself resting more. And Tempest, once wild and wary, now watched Jake with calm eyes that spoke of a bond deeper than anything ropes or reins could ever create. One warm evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Jake and Catherine sat on her porch watching Tempest graze in the pasture. The sky glowed gold, the kind of color that made everything feel like a promise. "You know," Catherine said, her voice soft, "I never believed anyone else would ride him. I don't know if I wanted someone to, or if I was scared someone would." Jake looked at her, seeing the truth she rarely spoke aloud. "You weren't scared someone would ride him," he said gently. "You were scared no one ever could again." She smiled, sad and hopeful all at once. "Maybe." "Your husband," Jake said. "He must have been a good man." "He was," Catherine answered, looking out across the pasture. "But grief isn't a chain, Jake. It's a shadow, and shadows only tell you the sun is still shining somewhere." Jake didn't know what to say. Words felt heavy, but Catherine didn't need a speech. She reached over and laid her hand on his, steady and sure. "You brought the sun back," she whispered. In that simple touch, something changed between them. Something honest, something real. Months passed, and Dry Creek Valley noticed the change too. Folks in town talked about Jake and Catherine like they were a story unfolding page by page. Some thought she'd finally found someone strong enough to stand beside her. Others said Jake looked like a man who had carried sorrow for too long and finally set it down. The truth was simpler. They had found each other in a world where most people only found loss. Their wedding happened in early autumn, the cottonwoods turning gold just in time to match the happiness warming the ranch. It was small and quiet, with neighbors filling the yard and Tempest standing tall at the fence, ears forward as if giving his blessing. Catherine wore her mother's dress. Jake wore his best shirt. When they said their vows, the whole valley seemed to fall silent, like the wind itself wanted to listen. After the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Tempest reared once, bright against the golden sky, and the crowd laughed with joy. Catherine cried a little. Jake held her close, and for the first time in years the ranch felt complete again. The years that followed were gentle ones, the kind of years that slip by without noise but leave behind a peace people spend their whole lives searching for. Jake took over most of the ranch work, building new corrals, clearing more pasture, and training Tempest's colts one by one. Catherine expanded the breeding program her husband once dreamed of, now made possible by Tempest's remarkable bloodline and Jake's patient hand. 5 years later, on a summer afternoon warm enough to melt worries, a young cowboy rode into the yard with a tired horse and a tired soul. Dust covered him. His clothes were worn thin. His eyes looked like they hadn't seen hope in a long time. "Ma'am," he said to Catherine, hat in hand, "I heard tell you folks help riders who've lost their way." Jake stepped forward before she could answer. "We don't turn people away here," he said. "Not if they're honest about what they need." The boy looked down, fighting a trembling breath. "I ain't much, sir. Just someone who's better with horses than people." Jake smiled, a slow, steady smile full of memory. "Then you're exactly like I was," he said, "and you came to the right place." Catherine stood beside him, her hand slipping into his. She nodded to the young cowboy with a warmth that made the boy's shoulders drop in relief. "Welcome to the Sterling Ranch," she said. "Let's get you settled." As the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the pasture, Tempest lifted his head and called out once, his voice rolling across the valley like a promise that life could still surprise you, even when you thought all the surprises were gone. Jake put an arm around Catherine's waist. She rested her head on his shoulder. Together they watched the new cowboy dismount, unsure and hopeful. It was a beginning, just like theirs had been. And in that quiet moment, Dry Creek Valley felt like the safest place on earth.